Rising Flame presents Holding Space, Deconstructing Disability Experiences and Navigating Ableism in Therapeutic Conversations, Part 1. Mental Health Manual Launch Event, New Delhi, December 3rd, 2021.
Hi everyone, our Zoom participants are here. They've joined us. Many of you are here in person. We really want to extend a warm welcome to all of you who could join us here today. We're so excited actually to see you in person, and we're really excited for our Zoom participants as well, who've joined us virtually from across the country and also across many parts of the world. Just a few sort of basic COVID-related pieces and technical pieces that we'd like to start with. We do have extra masks, sanitizers in case somebody loses their mask or something happens, it gets damaged. We have additional masks at the back at the registration counter. As you can see, the chairs are at social distances, so please feel free to spread out, whatever makes you feel safe and included. We're happy for you to do that. Speakers here, depending on who's at the table, how many of us, we have generally a very large distance from the audience, so we will intermittently take off our masks for the desk here when we are up on the stage. If there's any other concern, please do let us know. For our virtual participants, again, it's a Zoom platform. Please do reach out to any of our volunteers or type in the text box if you're facing any challenges, or wave at us and we'll try and pin you down. Use any of the emoticons to raise your hand if you're facing any technical or you need any other support. We have video streams going in, so one will be focused on us here. There's also a sign language interpreter here sitting to my right and who will be pinned on your screen. So please feel free if you need any other support or any other accommodation to let us know, and we'll try our best to deliver that. Just going to take off my mask. On behalf of the entire Rising Flame team, I take great pleasure in welcoming all of you to this launch event on mental health and disability. Today is International Day of Persons with Disability. It's a very important day for all of us to celebrate the difference, to celebrate diversity, to remind us to continue our struggles, to keep resisting, and to work towards inclusion. I'm Nadi Goyal. I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, and I'm very, very excited for this hybrid event, but also to see many of you in person and to rejoin and reconnect with many of you virtually. Like I keep saying, it's a hybrid event, so we may experience we demonstrated what kind of technical glitches we may experience. And so we may experience some sort of technical glitches. We would request all our participants or attendees here in the hall present with us, as well as those who have joined us virtually, to please allow that space and patience while the team fixes if anything comes up. You know, COVID really kept us apart for many months now, over a year and a half. But all of us found really creative ways to stay connected, to build community, to find each other, and continue this journey of advancing rights of people with disabilities, our rights, and right to live in an inclusive, accessible world. I just begin here with taking you through what's going to happen in the next 2.5 hours. We've really divided the event into two parts. The first half will be the launch of the manual Holding Spaces. For those of you who are virtually joining us, we will hold up the manual, we will show you how it looks, and it will be available on our website to be downloaded. The second half of the event is to hear from people from their own experiences. Mostly people with disabilities, coming from disability experiences, various locations, contexts, age, gender, and all kinds of diversity, to present to us what this means to them,
why today, on such an important day of the World Disability Day, the International Day of Persons with Disability, we've chosen to focus on our mental health. Why have we chosen to meet here today? To visualize something that we don't hear a lot about. We also have experts on this panel coming from the mental health space, the psychiatry space, who will then take us through what their idea of inclusive therapy looks like. To begin with, a few words or a few minutes on Rising Flame and who we are and why are we here today. We're a non-profit organization working across India. Since 2017, we work on rights of persons with disabilities with a focus on women and youth with disabilities. Basically, our idea and our passion and our commitment is to work for and with those persons with disabilities who stand at multiple intersections so that they have space, they have a voice, they can be seen, heard, and can lead from the front. People ask us, are you a non-profit? Are you a disabled people's organization? Who are you as an entity? And we simply say we're a feminist disability rights organization. If you wanted to really know who we are, what we stand for, we're committed to build a safe, inclusive, and accessible world where all people with diversities can live and thrive with dignity. We're a self-led team. We'll introduce you to the team as well. We're a self-led team really embodying the mantra of the disability rights movement of nothing about us without us. If we really see, from 2017 to now, we're turning 4 this year. But if you look at our core team, which is currently 3, we together hold experience, life experience and work experience of disability, gender and other intersections of about 2.5 decades in the rights-based development space. As passionate, committed individuals, what do? We ignite change. Yes, the name tells you what we do. It's Rising Flame and we ignite change. We empower people with disabilities as one part of our work. But what we also do is to work on altering the ecosystem, because an enabling environment is a key to inclusion, ending isolation and fostering opportunities. What do we do for empowering individuals? If we had to look at our work in these 2 brackets, and we take great pride in sharing some of our work that we've done up until now. I Can Lead National Leadership Program for Women with Disabilities. We launched India's first ever National Leadership Program for Women with Disabilities in 2019. Just the name of the program and what it stood for smashed stereotypes of who is a leader and who can really lead and what does the society think about it. The program was envisioned as mostly online, 80% online. It's a year-long program, and this was already envisioned pre-COVID. So accidentally, we became the visionaries of programming, longer-term programs, training programs, and so on and so forth. This program provides holistic support and invests in personal development and professional growth of women with disabilities, because women with disabilities often in families, in education, in employment and other spaces are left behind or considered at the lowest rung of the social order. Why are we doing this? So that these women with disabilities, our friends, our colleagues, our fellows of I Can Lead, can influence the facets of the world that they occupy and can become the torchbearers of change, of leadership, and of inclusion. Some of them are here. I don't want to embarrass them, but I will call out to them at some point. And some of our I Can Lead fellows are here, and we're so excited to have them here in this space with us, participating, contributing to the ecosystem change. We also work with, and so, when we launched I Can Lead, we were asked, oh, so you're an urban-based organization. You would work with English-speaking people. You would work more with people who already have some level of opportunities, some level of access. And this year, we launched our Swarna Jyoti program. Our Swarna Jyoti program is a feminist leadership program for women with disabilities activists who work at the grassroots, who work in the rural areas. This program was run in Hindi and saw participation this year when it was launched as a first cohort of over 25 women from across 10 states of the country. We worked with them because we want to ensure that we create equal opportunities at the grassroots. That we really ensure that equal gender participation happens in the disability movement, in the larger disability movement, at the grassroots, as well as in the work-life balance of women with disabilities. We took this journey with 25 participants, yes, but when they went to the fields and took the work forward, they have by now already influenced and changed the lives of over 150 women with disabilities and about 108 men with disabilities, their families and their caregivers. For youth, what do we do? When we say we focus on women and youth, really at the intersections of gender and age, or gender marginalization and age marginalization, we take great pride again to share that this year we launched Empower to Rise. The pandemic year and the pandemic time has been really a busy one for us. And we're really grateful to many of you who joined us virtually for all of these launches, helped us nominate deserving candidates, worked with us jointly in making this happen. Education is the ladder to achieving our dreams. Education ensures that we have a brighter future. It helps us change ourselves and change the world. And this is what Empower to Rise did. It selected Empower to Rise fellows from a huge number of applications and ensured that we provided monetary support as well as mentoring and guidance to our fellows who were selected, who were deserving, who said that they had a dream and wanted to take their education and work ambitions forward. They were facing many barriers, and if you saw the barriers, the kinds of barriers that were listed, right from not having a cell phone to wanting an accessible desk and chair to study and work, to really investing in sound systems because they wanted to become sound technicians or sound recordists, to larger dreams and ambitions. They were really heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time, the kinds of needs that are there, the kinds of gaps that exist. We also, a few years ago, dived into this whole series of consent workshops where we worked intensively on building capacities of youth across different cities in the country. If you remember, a few years ago, we, at least as a country, started focusing on violence, talking about sexual harassment that's faced by women and other genders. And so the question was, who thinks about consent for people with disabilities? What does this consent look like? And do our youth, have they been given that space, access to information and access to discussions that could help them build their ideas of consent? And so we embarked on this journey of Na Mein Na Hai, a workshop series that spoke about consent with youth with disabilities. When we say we altered systems, to just give you a glimpse of what we did in altering systems, we've launched fellowship programs called Spotlight Media Fellowship to train journalists. In fact, you'll see pieces being released every week from our end to train journalists to see what stories are being told, how can we influence these stories, and what can be the right language representation while women with disabilities and persons with disabilities, their access to justice, violence, discrimination is being reported. What would be the sensitive and correct representation? If you see the COVID research, you'll see copies of it in your bag for those of you who are here with us. And for the rest of you, there are links online on our website. We embarked on this journey of research and advocacy as well to bring policy change, to build knowledge production, to influence what policymakers would then recommend in their own spaces. So for example, National Human Rights Commission has taken many of the recommendations on board that we did and issued a disability advisory that they wanted to do. Training of multiple stakeholders is how we also work on this ecosystem altering. We have trained police, we've trained the national commissions, corporates, media houses, educational institutions, and many other government and other bodies and stakeholders to make these changes happen. If you're aware of Rising Flame's social media handles, we're going to be posting them online on the Zoom platform and displaying them at some point here. We're running multiple campaigns. We've been sharing knowledge and insights in over 100 public events that we've attended, we've presented at, we've made changes to, influenced, and also advocated at. What we do through this is shift movement discourse in the disability movement space, feminist movement space, and other spaces, but also change public perception while visibilizing narratives. Lastly, I'd like to say, and again, those of you who are here, your bag gives you a glimpse of what I'm going to be saying next. We have finally, through all our work, offline, online, pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, we have been creating public repository of lived experiences of persons with disabilities. You'll see it some of the books, Dil Vil Pyar Vyar, From Shadows to the Center, and many other talks on our YouTube channels, and the campaigns, the outcomes of the campaigns, the publications online, digitally, and the little the coffee table books that we've printed now. We'll show them to you in a minute. The editathons that we ran to create Wikipedia pages of people with disabilities, to train people with disabilities to become wiki editors, the public events that we've hosted on Mother's Day, on education of persons with disabilities, on Vela Panthi series, on masculinity, gender, disability, and so on and so forth, have all contributed to this public repository of knowledge, building a space where disabled people are front and centered and are heard. You can follow us social media, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on our mailing list. So sign up for our mailing list as well. With your support and collaborations, we've worked with partnerships, we've worked on partnerships, we've worked with many collaborations of networks and so on and so forth. And we are committed to building and creating opportunities for all, creating a world where there exists opportunities for all. So today we're here because we're entering this new phase on working on mental health of persons with disabilities. Why was this important for us? As people with disabilities, when I say we're a self-led team, most of our team are experts, are consultants, everybody who works with us. Majority of them either live with a disability, chronic illness, mental health or other health conditions, and so on. As a bunch of people, we saw the narratives around us. We had our own lived realities. And we know that discrimination doesn't just end at discrimination. Ableism is not just one power structure. It has deep impact. The world started talking about mental health in the COVID crisis and said there was a very, very huge impact on mental health of persons with disabilities. We identified it early on. We created spaces for connections and finding community. But what we realized is that addressing specifically the impact of all these everyday navigations of discrimination, ableism, abuse, violence, and everything else that people with disabilities face and their families face goes unrecognized. What would happen on your mental health? What happens on the sense of self? And this is why we launched this vertical or this segment of our work on mental health and persons with disabilities. We're here today only with the first step, a first big step that works again, one, to visualize the narratives of people with disabilities, two, to shift perceptions and alter the ecosystem by working with mental health professionals who would in turn provide support to disabled persons or persons with disabilities. Without any further ado, we'll move to the mental health manual launch. For each of you who have the bags, the manual is in your bag. And for all of you who are joining us online, here is introducing our mental health manual, Holding Spaces, Deconstructing Disability Experiences, and Navigating Ableism in Therapeutic Conversations. Yes, you could clap. So as an image description, I would just like to invite one of my colleagues to take a mic and describe the cover page. I'm holding, for all our blind friends or low vision friends, I'm holding the manual up with a very multicolored cover page here with the title that I read on top. And now I will be flipping to the credits page while one of my colleagues just describes the image to you. On the online version of the manual, all the image descriptions, of course, it's an accessible version, and all the image descriptions and other accessibility features are in place.
Can I read, Nadi?
Yes, please.
Okay. Image description of the cover page. An illustration of multiple people in a garden walkway setting. The person on the bottom left is wearing a hijab and using a rollator walker as they move closer to join the group. On the bottom right corner are two people mid-laughter. They are both standing. The person on the right has curly hair which is tied in a bun on top of their head. They are wearing a kurta and leggings with a dupatta. They are leaning against a pillar with one of their hands resting on it. They are wearing compression gloves and have kinesio taped their arm. The person on the left has short cropped hair and is wearing a patterned shirt with pants, with their hands behind them. They have a nasogastric tube connected through their nostrils. Behind them, a person is walking down the slope while holding a light brown dog with a leash. They have short cropped curly hair and are wearing a white t-shirt with an open purple flannel shirt and red pants. There are flowers growing behind them. There are stars of different sizes in the background that are sparkling.
Thank you so much, Srinidhi. We have the mic back on. Yes. Thank you so much, Srinidhi, for that description. That was Nadi Raghavan, our Rising Flame team member, co-leads program. So just introducing quickly the person who read beautifully the image description to us. The manual is now open. It's focusing on the credits page, and I'd really like to begin with this because bringing together a manual like this, having it published, really means a lot and has a lot of effort that goes into it. So before I invite our lead author, the writer of this manual, to take us through the manual and what it talks about and why is it important, I would like to take you through all the people who contributed to this process. Concept by Nadi Goyal, written by Prathamaraghwan, edited by Srinidhi Raghavan, illustrator Sonaksha Iyengar, external reviewers, and a big thanks to them, Sharad Phillips, Reshma Valyappan, and Amalina Dave. The whole printing process has been managed very beautifully and dealt by and delivered by Chainika Iyer. So thank you very much, the entire team, that you made this day happen, and we really hope that many mental health practitioners use this manual and in turn bring the inclusion and the sensitivity to persons with disabilities in their work and approaches. Can I now invite Prathamaraghwan, the expert who worked with Rising Flame, a mental health professional, a consultant for us, and a very close friend and colleague. I will introduce Prathama. I will try to do justice to the introduction, but we have limited time, so I'd had to cut short a lot of Prathama's introduction. I'm going to pause for a second. We have an indication from the sign interpreters that they will have to switch. Sarah? Pinky, if you can give me a verbal cue when you come up.
I am here.
Okay, can I start Prathama's introduction? Prathama, are you here already?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So Prathama is here, and I have the great pleasure of introducing Prathama here. She's a co-founder of Narrative Practices India with a PhD and Masters in Development Psychology from France and a Masters in Psychology from India. Prathama has over a decade and a half, that's over 15 years of experience as a mental health professional. She has continued to work in parts of India and in Nepal on disability and mental health with children, adults, and families. She has been conducting trainings on mental health and disability with community workers, educators, and mental health workers. Previously, she was a coordinator of mental health at the Inclusion Department of Access and Inclusion Department of Alan School IB Diploma Program in Kathmandu. She's also worked in mental health and well-being alongside communities in rural areas and with those living in conflict and post-conflict situations, in disaster situations, disaster context, with refugees and those communities, particularly in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, with Action for Hunger. I'm sorry, Prathama, I'm stuttering through your introduction. It's a lot to read, and so I'm trying my best to present. It has been absolute pleasure to work with Prathama, and she's the one who's made it happen. This is only the first of the hopefully four mental health manuals that we come up, holding spaces written by Prathamaraghwan. Can we have a huge round of applause for Prathama? Over to you, Prathama.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Am I? No? Okay.
I switched my off.
Now?
Not to the close on.
Now? Yeah. Okay, good. Um, so this manual for me is really the work of a community of people, like Nidhi was saying, and it started in Nidhi's imagination. It was nurtured in the community that Rising Flame brought together, in their documentation of people's stories, listening to their experiences and responding to what they heard. The self-learning manual is rich with these stories. I did write this manual, much of it, but this sort of work I feel is only possible because we speak to each other about these things. And not to correct or critique, but to think, learn, and unlearn together. I have thought about ableism and disability for many years, and I'm very grateful for the long conversations, feedback, resonance, and differences of opinion between Nidhi, Srinidhi, and me. In them, I too found community to talk about ableism in this way, to name it, to call it by its name, and to endeavor to make it more and more visible. This manual is an invitation to all of you to join us on this journey of finding community in resisting ableism together. So now I will just present some bits of the manual just to introduce you a little bit to it. So I will be using a presentation for this, and once we project the presentation, I'll get started. So the first slide of the presentation is the cover page of the manual that Nidhi was holding up, where there's a Rising Flame logo on the left, and the title of the manual, Holding Space, and the subtitle, which is Deconstructing Disability Experiences and Navigating Ableism in Therapeutic Conversations, Part 1, which means there will be a Part 2. And just, I'm going to read the image description again. So it's an illustration of multiple people in a garden walkway setting. The person on the bottom left is wearing a hijab and using a rollator walker as they move closer to join the group. On the bottom right corner are two people mid-laughter. They're both standing. The person on the right has curly hair, which is tied in a bun on the top of their head. They're wearing a kurta and leggings with a dupatta. They're leaning against a pillar with one of their hands resting on it. They're wearing compression gloves and have kinesio taped their arm. The person on the left has short cropped hair and is wearing a patterned shirt with pants with their hands behind them. They have a nasogastric tube connected through their nostrils. Behind them, a person is walking down the slope while holding a light brown dog with a leash. They have short cropped curly hair and are wearing a white t-shirt with an open purple flannel shirt and red pants. There are flowers growing behind them. There are stars of different sizes in the background sparkling. So on the next slide, I just want to share with you that the manual is in two sections. The first section is much longer, larger than the second section. So the first section is Deconstructing Ableism, and the second section is Ableism and its effects on disabled people's sense of self, their experiences of navigating the world. So the manual is made in a way that, it has links to reference videos, quotes, and excerpts from videos and articles, and questions for reflections. There's space for readers to take notes and notes from the author to support some of the reflections. So that's just how the manual is structured. And because so much of this manual is about ableism and deconstructing ableism, I wanted to offer one of the definitions from the manual. So on the next slide is the definition from the manual. It says, what is ableism? Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, okay. What is ableism? A system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, and productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-blackness, eugenics, colonialism, and capitalism. And there's an asterisk there just for us to think about other systems of oppression and marginalization in the context of India and South Asia, like caste and gender and marginalization of gender and sexual minorities also. So this form of systemic oppression leads to people and society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's appearance and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, produce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. This is a working definition by Delilah T.L. Lewis in Conversation with Disabled Black and Other Negatively Racialized Folk, especially Dustin Gibson. This was updated in January 2020. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to go a little bit into what each of these sections, the two sections that I mentioned, what they consist of. So the first section has 4 subsections, and the first one tackles what is ableism. And so we will use the definitions and some reflection questions to think about this and reflect on what the definitions bring up in terms of ableism and how it might influence people's lives. Then what does ableism look like every day for people with disabilities? And for every section, basically, there's either videos or articles or a combination of those, and the questions are based on the videos and articles. So one has to watch the video or see some of the excerpts of the article and think about the questions. It's kind of like a workbook also, so it has pages where you can reflect. And then the third subsection is delving into the inspirational lens and the social model of disability. So we've spent some time in this manual thinking about this, the inspirational lens and the social model of disability, and it's okay if these words are new and not familiar yet. Hopefully, one of our hopes from this manual is also to think about these things that people with disabilities, disability activists talk about and think about, and for us as mental health practitioners also to think about these things, think about disability in this way. So that section will take us deeper into those reflections. And the last section in the subsection is the influence of ableism on language, where we will talk about the kinds of language that we use that, either portray disability or the language that is used by disability communities in a particular way. We will also think about the language such as special needs, things like that. And of course, there are systems and ways of lots of systems that work, or educational institutions, or degrees we get, so much of this uses this language of special needs, right? So it's for us to, I think about where that language comes from and what sort of influence might that have on how we think about the access arrangements that people with disabilities need. That's section 1, and section 2 is ableism and its effects on disabled people's sense of self and their ways of navigating the world. And this section has videos from, I think they're called lightning talks, right? Yeah. And they're these short videos that were made by Rising Flame, and where people are talking about their experiences on these 3 topics. So on guilt, on support and consent, and on discrimination. So I just wanted to go to share with you some questions just to give you some idea as to what are these questions that are in the manual, So these are not in any chronological order. I've just picked some from different sections to give you an idea. So one of the questions that we start with is what comes to your mind when you think of ableism? What might it look like? And we also, under that section, we also explore ideas of normal and ideas of productivity, things like that for us to reflect on, and how ableism influences these ideas. And what are some situations where you might have noticed ableism, or situations people who consult with you might have mentioned that could be dominated by ableism? So, like I was saying earlier, the questions in the manual are framed, directed towards people who might be providing mental health support, and to think about ableism in that context as therapists, counselors, So, and then one question, which is an example of how we link the questions to the resources. So, do you see a connection between the idea of a disabled person as inspiration that Stella Young speaks about, one of the videos that's linked, and the idea of disabled person as the other that Nadi Goyal mentions in her talk? What connections do you see? And I also, the next slide is has an image of one quote by Niyar Saikia, and so the image is a beige background with the Rising Flame logo on the bottom right corner, and on the top left are quotation marks in deep red and yellow. In the center is a quote by Niyar, which I will read now. People with disabilities are often portrayed as comic reliefs of sort, where you can feel good about yourself by feeling bad about them. So that's the kind of space where we want others to take inspiration from. This sort of stereotype not only maligns the kind of perception people with disabilities want of themselves, but also prohibits any sort of inclusiveness. This also means we cannot learn from each other's experiences or even acknowledge our very different experiences. And below on the image in deep red is written Niyar Saikia, a photo of Niyar on the top right corner in which she has very long wavy hair with golden highlights. Her left hand is reaching to hold the strap of a brown sling bag on her right shoulder. She's looking at the camera and smiling. Behind her is a digitally drawn background with big yellow hibiscus flowers, green leaves, and pink-colored paint splashes. So about the section 1, the last thing is this, just to share so there's the section called the notes, where there are just reflections and connections that are being made from the videos we are watching, the questions we are asking, etc. And this is one such excerpt. So Norman Kunch, in his talk, Relocating the Problem of Disability, speaks about using the phrase, the right to be disabled, in a conversation with friends. Relocating the problem of disability means we go from the presumption that people should not be disabled to the idea that disability is an inherent part of the human experience. This is crucial in our understanding of disability through the social model and the advocacy for access and design for all. He explains further by saying, so that ramp, rather than being an accommodation for me, is the correction of an architectural error. The correction of an architectural error, looking at access in this way, places the responsibility on society to make spaces and systems accessible to everyone and leave no one behind. All of you, those of you here in person will, can flip through the manual, and those who are accessing it digitally would also see it. So, but this is one double page from the manual on this next slide. And the left page has an illustration of a rule sheet with a grey dotted background and yellow borders for note taking. And the right page has some notes on ableism, an image of Shivangi Agarwal in a denim strappy dress and a red wing on their left shoulder on a yellow background with red stars on it. Shivangi is wearing glasses and pink lipstick. There is a quote by Shivangi next to her image on the manual page. So now, moving over to section 2, where there was 3 sections on guilt, on support and consent, and on discrimination. And these are some questions picked up from that section. How might the agency being taken away repeatedly affect their sense of self and contribute to further shame, blame, and guilt? What are some understandings about lives of persons with disabilities that are standing out to you? What does this get you thinking about how you might take this knowledge from the lived experiences of women with disabilities into your therapy rooms? So questions such as these, with references with videos to help you to think through some of this. And the next slide is a quote by Mia Mingus, who's a writer, educator, and trainer on transformative justice and disability justice. And on the left of the slide is an image of Mia, which is described, her own description of it is a black and white photo of a Korean woman smiling with long hair and glasses, sitting on a wooden chair with plants and trees all around her. And the quote by Mia Mingus, "This is the cruelty of ableism. It robs us from each other. This is the weight of access. This is what gets said in whispers, not on the microphone and at the panel. This is what gets shared in a fleeting glance between us. Disabled, sick, crippled folks, a recognition, a silent sigh, an unfocused stare. This is what we don't share, don't know how to share, because it is so instinctual, so ground level. So what's the point? It's never going to change. This is the air I have breathed since I can remember as a disabled child, never knowing it could be any different, never having been able-bodied." And a last question related to the quote by Mia Mingus. What is standing out to you about the cruelty of ableism from the things you have read, listened to, and thought about so far? Yeah. So we really hope that that you engage with this manual in whatever way that feels comfortable and resonating to you. So there are a few hopes that we had for this manual. So one was to create a resource that is a multimedia resource, so to have and accessible, so to have videos but also have other ways of accessing information, and then have reflection questions to think about it. And so it can be used in two ways. One is it is a space for self-reflection. It's kind of like a workbook too, so you can look at it and spend some time trying to think about the questions in the manual. And the other is that it can also be used as a scaffold for facilitation of workshops, but also discussions within teams. I mean, you could watch one of the videos and think about the questions as a team together. These are some of the ways that we hope you will be able to use the manual. And that's it from me. No, that's okay. So, thank you. Over to you all.
Thank you so much, Prathama. Some of the quotes were really hard as a person with a disability, but also as a blind person. When you started describing Nia's image, I was smiling. So it's really bringing, living the principles within the manual and encouraging others to work, to move forward on these principles of disability justice, access, intimacy, and so on. Just to again share that the manual has been envisioned for mental health practitioners, for self-reflection. It can also be used for facilitated trainings, but like Prathama said, it's really important, and it will serve as a space or as a resource that can be used with teams, with little workshops that we hold, or just in groups thinking about what disability and ableism means, right? What disability experiences around ableism are. How are disabled people speaking up? What are they speaking up about? If we have time, we'd like, part of these videos there? Yeah. So it's ready, right? So in case there's, yeah. So we'll open up for Q&A if people have any questions about the manual, any other questions, comments, virtually as well. We are collecting your questions. We've not unmuted you. We've kept the settings on mute for now so that we could manage all the large number of people who have joined us virtually. The screen's that side, so I just turned. But we are also, your questions are welcome. Do write them in the chat box. If you're finding it difficult to write in the chat box, please use the raise hand icon. And folks who are here, if you had any questions, comments, anything to ask, suggest, we have two volunteers, Sneha and Amisha, with mics. They can, if you raise your hand, they could come to you. No?
I just wanted to add something. With ableism, there is a one term which I.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Abhishek Aneka. I'm a writer. And basically, so with ableism, I came across a term by Gregor Wahlberg, which is called ability privilege. And I thought it was a very interesting term because although we are familiar with class privilege and caste privilege, we are not familiar with ability privileges. And if we have an understanding of ability privileges, especially amongst the able-bodied people, then it might help us to navigate that conversation on ableism in a much better way. So I just wanted to add that point, raise that point.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for adding that point. And for everyone, we'll hear more from Abhishek on the panel. And so we'll move to Saudamini. I think Sarah said Saudamini wanted to speak. Amisha, Sneha. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Saudamini and Saudamini Bethe. And thank you so much for inviting me such a wonderful program today, getting to meet people in person. I'm very proud of what you are doing. I have a small question. The manual is so inspiring. I am already getting inspired listening to you. But I was hoping, how can we get this in an accessible format for the deaf people? And also because we do not prefer reading so much. I would prefer if there is a sign language version, so if something can be done about that.
Sure. Thank you, Saudamini, for that suggestion, and we'll try and work towards it to have the whole manual. So it's a 50-page manual. We'll work on with you maybe and others to see how we could take this on board. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. The videos used have subtitles in sign languages. We're conscious of our resources that are online and the resources that are used. If they are external resources, we still try to add subtitles, etc. So just to bring that to the notice as well. Thank you, Saudamini.
Saudamini again. Yeah. I have a solution for that. If I could, maybe we can try to have deaf people, you can reach out to different foundations or associations and get connected with them. And, maybe have a workshop for the deaf people explaining the manual and telling them the stories and having them then sign it.
Great. We'll definitely take that on board. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, as well. Yes, we have.
I'm Arushi. Thank you so much for this manual and holding this event today. Prathama, you mentioned that you don't need to be disabled to experience ableism. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more on that idea.
That's brilliant. Thank you for the lovely question. Prathama, over to you.
I hope I can find the words, but no, I think I think what that means is that the ideas of productivity, the ideas of producing excellence, all of these things, right? These ideas dominate all of everyone's life, and they do influence mental health in everyone's life, disabled or non-disabled, right? So I think one of our hopes, that quote mentions it, but one of our hopes is also that these conversations that talk about ableism will happen in a lot of therapeutic conversations, and with both disabled people as well as non-disabled people, and challenge, because we do need that. Like Nidhi was talking earlier about working on the environment, right? Like on and I think if we are to challenge these things, we have to challenge it in our lives too, in the lives of non-disabled people too, in order for us to, be able to sort of resist ableism together, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the answer I have. Huh?
Can I add something?
Please, yes.
Okay. So this reminds me of a video by someone I admired, Kamla Bhasin. And in one of her TED talks, she said ki, and she speaks in Hindi, so I'm just for a second switching to Hindi, I'll explain in English. कि मर्द आपको समझ नहीं रहा कि सेक्सिज्म से आपके ऊपर कितना भार आ जाता है. हो आप 2 साल के, बचपन से बताया जाता है दीदी का ध्यान रखना है, इसकी रक्षा करनी है, right? So the impact of any kind of power structure, what Kamla ji says in her video is that you're 2 or you're 6, if you're a man, sexism impacts you and you're not identifying that, because from that age you're told that you have to protect your sister, and the whole sort of, not maybe burden, but the responsibility of providing this protection is on you. When ableism constantly says that people with disabilities are burdens, right, on societies, on families, what happens to siblings? What happens to parents? What happens to neighbors? What happens to schools and institutions? Because we don't work on enabling inclusive environments, you're already growing up in an environment where the sibling is told by the world that you are now the caregiver and you need to sacrifice your life for this person, right? When you're in teams at workplaces and you don't include people with disabilities and you come from this mindset, right, you're losing on a very rich talent, maybe a diverse experience. We see how teams thrive when there's diversity. So ableism also brings a lot of losses and issues in non-disabled people's life. We just don't recognize it because we feel like it's their issue, right? Of course it impacts people with disabilities, but it impacts non-disabled people, and that's why we live in this exclusive world when neither of the sides are benefiting at all. Thank you.
To add one more thing, Nadi.
Yes.
But I think, it just got me thinking about what Abhishek was saying earlier about the ability privilege also, right? I think it's still important to mention that it marginalizes people with disabilities, right? It does, ableism affects the lives of non-disabled people too, but it marginalizes and others the lives of people with disabilities, and that is important to keep at the center. Remember that, keep at the center. Just wanted to say that. Thanks.
So thank you, Prathama, because in one of the, when we were testing this manual, we held a workshop, and I remember Prathama saying that ableism actually benefits you and you're not recognizing that benefit. And because it's benefiting or bringing these kind of privileges, we let it be. So, thank you. Can we have any questions from online?
Yeah, can I just ask a question?
Yes, George will come to you and then we'll go to the online question.
Yes. Okay.
1 second. Just have a comment here about the ongoing conversation and then we can go to George.
Okay, George, is that okay? If we can just pause for 1 second. There's a comment online about ableism and...
No, in here, right here.
Yeah, okay, right here.
Yeah, you're the boss. You decide.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to be... You can clearly see Srinidhi stopped me, so there is the team is the boss.
Hi, so I am Anna, and I just wanted to add to what Prathama was saying, and in fact just like a flip side of what Nidhi was saying is that actually breaking the disabling structures will, or making access universal will make it, when that happens, then able people will also realize what they were missing, because the world becomes so much more navigable, easy to navigate for everybody.
Correct.
And for example, in the therapy space, if the structures that are, the ableist structures that are there in therapy are broken down, I'm sure somebody who does not identify as disabled will also suddenly find the conversations to be a lot more easily flowing.
Right.
that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Anna. It's like the ramp, the vibration mode on the cell phone. Nobody realizes those were access measures because so many people are using them, right? It's become such a part of life and benefits everyone. Yes, over to you, George. Sorry for making you wait.
No, so as you said, let me introduce myself. I'm George Abraham, and I'm always nervous when I ask a question in a forum. Whether the question is foolish or whether it is a good question, but I shall ask the question nevertheless. I think this manual, listening to Pratima speak, I think it's going to be a very exciting reading and learning. And I think the ideas that have been projected and shared in the manual is magnificent, wonderful. The question is that these ideas are juxtaposed with the huge, huge set of thought processes and ideas which people in the world, we are a very small minority when it comes to, our thoughts and the thoughts around us. I find that even within my own family, I am the only disabled person in the family of 4, and very often I find my agency being compromised, even when they know that I'm competent, capable, blah blah blah. So I just wanted to know, while you put together these manuals, have you given any thought to how you're going to scale it up and accelerate the impact of what is being said in these manuals? Thank you.
Right. Should I take that one? George, thank you for a very interesting and a very difficult question, both. So the reason the manual has been put, the reason why the mental health work around people with disabilities started is a very emotional reason, right? Like you see, as a person with a disability, agencies get compromised, consent issues arise, discriminations leave a stronger impact, and they're not seen because apparently you've quote unquote overcome everything, right? And so to make visible this very, very, very important intersection, which is put beneath, under and under and under layers, particularly because as a disabled person, if you say this is impacting me, it's further, you're given further negative points, right? Saying you could not overcome this, right? Or now you want, it fits right into people's pity story. And so the work began because this intersection really needs to be addressed, right? So one was visibility. 2, the idea is that manuals are one component and a large component of our mental health work, which will now commence. We're also going to start working with people with disabilities to work with them, support them to access and understand and unpack this mental health impact, right, through another format. We're not announcing all of it here just now because we're still building on our plans. These particular manuals, the first step that we have planned is to reach out to mental health institutions, organizations, providers, mental health activists, discourse spaces, workshops, and so on and so forth. So this will be first circulated to scale. We're focusing on a specific group of people. And because we already, so Prathama, who is the lead author, has worked with mental health professionals so closely for so many years, right? And so the whole dissemination or the scaling up plan is first to or outreach plan, I would say, is to first work with the mental health professionals. See that space getting inclusive, the service providing space getting inclusive, and if you see, that could be one main end goal of this manual. But what we are going to do is we are going to conduct workshops. We are going to build on this manual through other formats and reach people with disabilities. So the impact and the usage will become a snowball impact through the other pieces that we bring in as well. Does that help as of now? George?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll really look at leaders like you, George, to use these pieces of ableism, to use these pieces of discrimination, to use some of the stories that have been told, the videos that are there in the manual, to really start some of the discourses, right? To engage people more. So it's also to create, or again, like I said, we always create resources and repositories and open source resources that could then be further used by all the leaders, experts in multiple movements. So really hoping that all of you could take this forward in your own ways, in your own spaces. We can only take, 12, 15, yes.
needs to leave quickly about today, so if you could start.
So we'll take one last question, Srinidhi. Thank you for flagging about the time. We'll just take one last question and then invite our panelists here. We'll also like to request others to hold on to the question. We can maybe have Prathama back at the end of the panel or have an informal interaction to respond to some more.
Yeah, one last question.
Hi, so this is Neha from Planet Able. I have two questions actually. One is
one last question. Okay, fine, Neha. Please
so the first one is, what about ableism in disabled people? And the second one is, what about when disabled people support ableism in a way that even if you are asking for their rights and access to them, they are like, let it be, don't bother.
That must be fatigue, Neha. I'm coming from space of, I would like to take the second question. Prathama, if you'd like to take the first, I can answer both, but it's your show, so you should also answer. I think the second question, I would really like to say that people with disabilities don't always ask for their rights.
Yeah.
I would like to claim it here in a public event that even someone like me at some point will say, just forget it. You know, because we are human beings and everybody forgets that. I'm round the clock an activist because that's my identity. But I cannot be an activist at every point. I may have that day when my head is splitting, like I have a strong headache. It may be a day where I've had a quarrel with someone. It may just be a day where I want to be silent, where I want life to go smoothly. It may be a day where I'm really anxious for a public event next day. Right? Or it could just be a day where I'm out on a date. Why would I start doing accessibility awareness and inclusion sensitization when I'm out on a date? I'm just out, right? And so many a times, in many contexts, many of us choose to leave it and say, let it be, it's too exhausting. Let it be, it's too much. Or just let it be today, right? It's not like a defeat. It's just like, theek hai yaar, just let go, right? So if you don't want to be accessible or inclusive, you need to find us on one of those days, when we are okay to let it go. But it's really that. And the first one is ableism is there in the disability community. As a disabled person, I can share that, right? Many a times, because we are influenced by ableism, we are in this space, in this world, in this society that is ableist. It influences us. We internalize conversations. I acquired my disability when I started living as a disabled person. I realized how many ableist ideas, despite having a sibling with a disability, I had still internalized about women with disabilities. People internalize about themselves also. This whole idea of you're not good enough is not just, the non-disabled world says, and many people with disabilities internalize. And so what other people with other disabilities can do, similarly you internalize as a person who's not living with that disability, right? So someone who's sighted may internalize some ableist ideas about blind folks. Someone who is hearing can internalize some ideas about deaf folks. So it just goes on and on, right? And that's why we say that ableism is all pervasive. Ableism really, really needs to be reflected on, thought about, worked with, and challenged.
What could I add to that, Nadi?
Sorry.
Yeah, nothing. I think I was going to say some of the same stuff, so thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening, and please download the manuals.
So the manual is up on our Rising Flame website, and we can share the URL on the Zoom call, but I'm once again holding up the manual the right way. That's not this way. Holding up the manual, I'm also just, before inviting the panel, going to quickly share the other books, which are every printed material in your bag is all online in accessible formats on our website or links on our website to other publications. Here is From Shadows to the Center, a coffee table sized booklet. It is on sexual harassment and the Me Too movement, where women with disabilities from across the globe have spoken up. This was also a 16 days campaign that we ran last year. The second book in my hand is Dil Vil Pyar Vyar, It's a collection of personal essays, narratives, a journey of love, romance, rejection, dating, disability. And again, it's a collection that you'll find links to on our website. We partnered and we published with others. And here are two reports that I'm holding up. Neglected and Forgotten. This is the impact of the COVID crisis on women with disabilities. And we've only printed executive summaries and key recommendations in English and in Hindi. So thank you so much for listening to us patiently. Please don't go away. We have a very interesting panel coming up. There will be also a very important session of thanking everyone at the end. And this will be followed for people in person here who have joined us for lunch, by lunch. So please hold on, and I would like to invite Nadi Goyal, co-leads programs Rising Flame. Thank you so much, Prathama. Thank you for your presentation. And Nadi would moderate the next segment, which is the panel, and would invite our panelists. We'll also request the sign language interpreters to change positions.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. And what an honor to go after both of you and all the work that has been put into this manual. I would like to begin by inviting our panelists to here. We have 3 panelists who are present in this room today and 2 who are present remotely on Zoom. So we will be seeing them on the projector, right? Arjita, I just request you to pin and spotlight both our panelists onto it. Yeah, till then I'll begin to introduce the panelists. I would like to begin by welcoming Abhishek Anika. Abhishek Anika is a writer, poet, and performer. He identifies as a person with locomotor disability and chronic illness, which shapes his creative endeavors. He has written on disability and illness for the Times of India, The Quint, DNA, Kitab, Mad in Asia, among others. His poems have been published in Nether Quarterly, Gulmohar Quarterly, Indian Cultural Forum, Sunflower Collective, the Alipur Post, Poshampa, and Junkie Pool. His Hindi poetry collection, Antrang, was published in 2019. He uses spoken word poetry as a means of disability activism and has given more than 50 performances focusing on disability. It gives me great pleasure to invite Riddhi Dastadar, who's a writer and reporter in Delhi. Their work focuses on disability justice, public health, gender, rights, and development, climate and culture. Until recently, they led long-read series, Sound, Fury, and 4G on gender tech development at a rural feminist media house, Khabar Lahariya. They were a mental health reporting fellow 2020-2021 on COVID-19 and chronic psychiatric disability with data journalism site India Spend. Their work has won the 2020 TFA Award and have been nominated for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, Wasafiri New Writing Prize, and more. They hold an MA in Gender Studies with a focus on disability and hybridity from Ambedkar University, Delhi. Next on our panel, who's already on stage, so I will introduce her last since you already had the pleasure of hearing her speak. But I would like to introduce our 2 panelists who are joining us via Zoom. Sharath Philip works and practices in psychiatric rehabilitation and community psychiatry. He has been supervising psychiatry students in their therapy training schools of supportive, cognitive, and psychodynamic therapies. He has lived experience of a visual disability. He is an ardent advocate of mental health and has advisory roles for community development and mental health program for some well-known national and international NGOs. He is the founding president of the Indian Association of Psychiatry Trainees. Until recently, he was associated with NIMHANS. He has been published nationally and internationally in well-known peer-reviewed scientific journals. He is listed as amongst the 10 young people with disabilities fighting COVID-19 across the world for providing care for long-stay patients. Welcome, Sharad. Yeah, and for this manual, he was also one of our external reviewers. Next panelist is Jasmine. Jasmine is trained in social work from gender perspective from Tata Institute of Social Sciences and has an MPhil in sociology from the Delhi School of Economics. She has been part of WHO's Quality Rights Gujarat, where she worked on health systems reform. She has worked on implementing innovative research interventions at scale for mental health and human rights in low-resource settings since 2014. She co-leads the scale-up and implementation of Atimyata, a large rural community-led intervention to reduce mental health care and social care gap. She leads the Upsides peer support project in Gujarat and is involved with the capacity building core of Spirit, which is suicide prevention. She has also co-led projects on recovery and mental health in India. She continues to provide consultancies services to other LMICs for the implementation of quality rights and provides mentorship on the program's e-learning platform. Last but not the least, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Nadi Goyal, who's the founder and executive director of Rising Flame. Rising Flame, she's a disabled feminist activist from India and has been working on disability rights, gender justice since a decade. Her work spans research, writing, training, campaigns, advocacy, and art. She has been invited on the core group of persons with disabilities by the National Human Rights Commission India. She is on the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force of FIGI and sits on the advisory board of WISE, a grant-making project by the Dutch Ministry. She has just completed her term as the president of Association for Women's Rights and Development, where she was the first disabled woman to take the presidential role. As a global advisor to UN Women's Executive Director, she works to raise the profile of issues at the intersection of disability and gender through op-eds, journal articles, lectures on national and international forums. Right? Her work on disability, gender, diversity, and inclusion have paved the way for many nonprofits, disability rights organizations, global rights organizations, and corporate offices and policy spaces. On that note, thank you everybody for joining us. And the panel is a group of stellar people who had lived experiences and work in this space for a very long time. So I would like to begin by asking a few questions, but before I start, just want to set up the conversation for the panel itself. One of the things that we see a lot when we think about mental health of people with disabilities, and something that we encountered while we were working on the manual, was that the mental health needs actually change based on the disability. And their lived experiences, of course, as many of us know, is so diverse, even within the large ambit of people with disabilities, that having to have a conversation about this meant that we needed to hold space for the idea that each of us comes into this space with diverse experiences. In my own experience of navigating the mental health system, one of the things that I have unfortunately have had to deal with is that we spend a lot of time having to explain why our disability causes extreme mental health distress, right? Or why some ideas of self-care or some perceptions of what we as individuals need to do to have better mental health, which mental health professionals often offer in this space, are at odds with our disabilities. So the very nature of the support that we are receiving needs to include and place our disability in the center. So on that note, I would like to ask our first panelist, Sharad, when you think of mental health needs of people with disabilities, what do you think is missing at the moment?
Am I clear?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so so this is a very loaded question to ask me in terms of what's missing. But before we try to even set out as to say what's missing, we would also need to put in perspective what's actually there, what's understood. There is also a risk that we run, especially when we are looking at healthcare services. When you try to categorize or try to look at something different or unique, there is the risk of trying the labeling happening, that these are issues which are unique to persons with disability, or these are issues which are unique to persons with some particular form of disability. So that's the ravine that we want to avoid. In terms of what's missing, yes, the simple and the simplest way that I can put it is there aren't enough disabled mental health care professionals, period. If there were, then this would not be something that we were discussing as much as how could we make it better, or how could we improve inclusion, or how could we better understanding amongst practitioners. That being said, there is one big lacuna that we see. I congratulate Rising Flame for bringing up this manual. I thank you all for, starting this initiative. But where this actually belongs is in the mainstream textual resources. It's in the mainstream reading materials which should be out there. The third is, if you see, in terms of actual understanding of mental health needs, there aren't any sort of robust surveys in terms of understanding what the actual needs are, what's happening. See, this is again framed within the ableism narrative. People often forget that the opposite of ability is not disability; it's actually inability. So, you mean you can't do this? Or these statements like, okay, do you think this would be too difficult for you to get done? In contexts of, disabled persons as caregivers, disabled persons as people who are accessing mental health care services themselves, have very, very varied presentations as well. They may be hesitant in the beginning. So as someone from both sides of the table, I myself, when I had to try and discuss things, what was affecting me, especially during the COVID time, in spite of whatever I was able to accomplish, there was a lot of issues that I had faced. So when I tried to explain it to someone, it was very difficult for people to understand it. Finally, the one person who understood, I actually felt so relieved. Half my problem or half my burden seemed to be just in trying to help them understand, why am I thinking like this? Why do I think that I may not be able to do things? Or why do I think that I feel that I am not enough, or I'm not adequate in what I am doing, or I'm not, in a competitive space, I'm lacking behind. How do I feel that I'm not included? How do I feel that I'm not being allowed to participate? Or those kinds of things are actually a big issue. A lot of times people do come, especially disabled persons, when they are looked at as disabled persons, we also as mental health practitioners end up seeing their disability before their personhood. And that is something that I try to get my trainees to overcome. I always try to ask them to keep it in mind that it's a person with a disability rather than a disabled person who's there. Even if that person is there, that disability does influence certain thinking patterns, does influence how care and services are accessed. But more importantly, it also influences what you say to them. It seems to be that people, when especially as practitioners, when they talk to people, they kind of have that disability perspective in mind, but for them that disability and inability has become conflated. So in terms of that, one of the biggest things which is missing is an understanding of what the disability does to someone's personhood over there, does to their autonomy, does to their choice, does to their sexuality. So these things really need to be mainstreamed, and like I said, this is where it really belongs. I really wish that there was no need for bringing out such a manual, but it would really find its best inclusion in main resources, as you said, as you mainstream these things and scale it up in workshops, I think that's a good home for it. And that should be the context and the framework within which it should be set. There is a lot of emphasis on gender-sensitive language. It's about time. I think it's overdue that there has to be something with regard to ableism sensitivity. As Abhishek put it, the sensitivity about ableistic privileges also should be mainstream. So net, I really wish that there were more disabled mental health care professionals. We would get to know that and understand that more. Two, there was better participation with regard to surveys, with regard to qualitative studies on what the mental health impacts are across the lifespan, across different stages of their life that persons with disabilities face, and that would really help us to compile things. Otherwise, it's a very nuanced and loaded thing. I mean, no two persons, even if they have similar disabilities, identical extents or whatever, the issues are absolutely different. Okay. So there's no general answer to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharad. Though you say there was no answer, I mean, that it was a loaded question. I think you covered many important points around the need for more conversation about this, of course, in the places in which mental health professionals are getting trained. And also to add to the deeper conversation just generally among professionals itself. And I think that is a very important distinction for us to make. I would just like to move over to Abhishek and ask you the similar question around what do you think is missing when we think about mental health needs of people with disabilities?
Can you hear me?
I think it has to go up, Abhishek. When it goes up, it gets a red light.
Sorry for that accident. Yeah, it worked at least. I will take it a notch down because, I will say that in a mental health space, when we often talk about disabilities and mental health, it's like Sada Kutta Tommy, Tada Kutta Kutta. And it happens again and again because when a disabled person goes and says that they have bad mental health, they're not taken seriously. In the mental health space, I'm not saying society chhod do bhai. And it happens because, yeah, my dog is important, your dog isn't important. And that is because it is taken for granted that disabled people will have mental health problems because they are disabled. So all of these misconceptions are already there. Then you come to what is the biggest problem? The biggest problem is that we don't have a welfare system and that disabled people are forced to live with their parents most of the times. So you are living in a toxic environment, most probably, hopefully not, but most of us live in a toxic environment where we are financially, emotionally dependent on our caregivers, our parents. We have a very complicated relationship with them. In that situation, imagine having no external care system, having no access to mental health systems, and depending on your primary caregivers, your financial bosses for catering to your mental health needs, for asking them for permission or discussing your mental health needs with them, who are the primary source of the problem, who can be, and in most cases are. And it's a very traumatic situation which won't be talked about because there are no easy solutions for mental health problems of disabled. I wish I could have said that there is this person who is very disabled friendly, he or she or them, they are very good therapists, so my problems are solved. Because mental health issues are intricately designed around our day-to-day lives, and till we have lives where we can live interdependently or independently, and we can live with dignity. We can have a social welfare system, not 500 rupees or 1000 rupees, which we have to depend upon. Then only we can move towards better mental health for disabled. The other thing is, of course, having more disabled people as mental health practitioners would help. But the thing is, we have slowly representation in the medical community, but it hasn't changed the larger outlook of the medical community towards the disabled people. Recently, one of our friends who was featured in this booklet was quite harassed when they went to get their disability certificate made. So all of the system is completely hostile. Even getting a certificate, anyone who has had to get a certificate made in India knows how harassing the entire process can be. If you have a learning disability, if you have a mental health disability, that process is horrendous. It's impossible almost. People give up on it. So despite the curriculum being included on disability, there is no possible solution in the future. I can't see it happening overnight or within a decade. The thing is, without a welfare system that supports disabled in all spheres of life, we won't be able to have good physical and mental health for persons with disabilities across disabilities. And I completely will say this with confidence, that despite our different bodily experiences and bodily advantages and disadvantages, we have common experiences of exclusion. It's just that we don't talk about it, we don't get enough forums to talk about it, but we have across disabilities. The exclusion we feel from within our homes, within our society, within our colleges, within our academic systems, within public spaces, is something that binds us all together. It's just that the system has already defined that there are different things, solutions for different people, and it suits the current funding entire system which we have. But it is not something which as disabled people we feel. It's something that we are meant to, like anyone who has invisible disability. I have multiple. I have invisible. I have a chronic illness. I have disability.
Sorry to interrupt, but if
I will wrap up. Thank you. So, and the other thing which I will bring up as a person who has chronic illness is your relationship with your body is often complicated, and no societal relationship or social model could solve it. When you are ill for 4 months or 5 months a year, your body and mind behaves very differently, and there are deep-rooted systemic issues which there can't be one simple approach. That's my point, and that's the thing I would like to end with.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up also. And I think there was so much resonance with what you were saying about just generally how we perceive mental health in and also who's disabled, right? Either you are this really you're meant to be really inspiring, or you are depressed because of your disability, right? Like disabled joy is somehow missing in this context, but it's also invisibilized by the assumption that if we feel disabled joy, then we cannot have depression or anxiety or something like that, right?
I will just add one line. Disabled people have the right to be mediocre, and that is something which every NGO, every disabled rights person should accept. Disabled people have the right to be same as anyone else, and that is to be perfectly mediocre, below average, and not do anything exceptional.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think more. No, there was some resonance in the audience, but the panel, I think, is tired of having to be a particular way. Coming to Riddhi and Nidhi, and Riddhi can go first. Primarily, what do you think mental health? Why do you think that mental health support? I mean, like it is different for disabled people, yes, and it needs to be different. But why do you think there needs to be an understanding of ableism and its effects on disabled people's lives?
Thanks, Srinidhi. So, I mean, I really resonate with whatever has been said so far, and I've noted down my points because I need that organization to be able to speak. So, the thing that Sharad said about inability versus disability, I think is at the core of my answer, because a really big thing for me as someone who lives with OCD, who has chronic illness and pain and anxiety, and who I also work as a reporter. So I report on mental health and psychosocial disabilities, and basically how public health, and as Abhishek was talking about, like our welfare system or a lack of an effective welfare system affects disabled people's ability to go through daily life and not just get by and constantly tackle problems, but like thrive. We don't have that support in place. So I think this really gets at the core of what why mental health practitioners then need to have an understanding, because the ways in which ableism infiltrates our lives is so nefarious. All aspects of our being, from our relationships and the mere ability to like be able to keep up with friends, which takes a lot of effort if you're disabled or you have limited energy, that changes. Being able to lift a quote unquote equal load at home in terms of chores or organization, the amount of support you might need, your sex lives, as Sharad mentioned, sexuality is something that is obviously impacted by disability. And of course work, which is where it shows up the most in terms of measuring your worth. How productive are you? How efficiently and quickly can you produce? How can you compete? How can you be exceptional? So that, you can feed into this narrative of this toxic thing of overcoming disability. I don't want to overcome my disability. I want workarounds, and I want the system to be designed for me and for other disabled people. So I feel that the mental health practitioner really needs to be an advocate to help combat this internalized ableism that we have and this feeling of shame because of the system, and also to come up with these workarounds. So for instance, I'm just going to be specific because I work better with tangible things. So how to talk to your boss, say how to approach disability accommodations for a workplace. And very often for me, just by virtue of existing as a reporter in a news organization or as a freelancer who they work with regularly, very often it's the first disabled person who is coming and talking to them about disability or about needing time. Talking about reporting from like a public mental hospital where I was there, one of the senior doctors had said something about, oh, this person is mad, and I was just like, something inside me flinched, and I was like, oh, you don't know that, I'm also disabled, and this term crazy or mad, like these are things that are very personal to me, and they just don't expect a disabled professional to be there. So anyway, as I was saying, so to help kind of approach it from a lens of rights and equity, and not from shame and not being enough. So I think the mental health practitioner then needs to be more informed. You should know about disability accommodations. You should know about a rights-based approach. To help tailor your relationships and work on small things. So for instance, email and correspondence is very exhausting for me. To not have, as Abhishek said, like a catch-all family knows best approach, since families can often be sites of violence for us, even if they mean well. And very often they do. It can come from a lens of ignorance. To not come with a objectifying and fixing mode for the disabled person, but to advocate and help us cope with this profoundly ableist world in which just exhausting and persisting is violent very often for us. And then if I'm talking from like, again, going back to the welfare state aspect of it, for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, disability means you are spending more and more and more than you can afford usually. Finances can be extremely stressful. Our disability pensions in the way that they currently exist are inconsistent and they're inadequate. In certain states, it's 2,000 rupees a month. For me personally, I mean, I don't have a disability certificate because even though I have a diagnosis, I have seen the test and the way you go through certification, and I can't locate the place in my body where literally there's a part in the test where they ask you to locate the place in your body where there's something wrong with you. So anyway, what I was saying is, it's hard. It's mental health practitioners need to know this stuff. They need to, I think, be advocates for disabled people, and then life for everyone will improve in that sense. So certification, attitudes of doctors and diagnosis, I'm wrapping up, I promise. Yeah, the last thing was about stigma and pop culture, but I guess that's a very obvious point. So I think I've made my points.
I mean, just also to, I think some you've made so many points. I think summarizing what you said isn't close to impossible. But I think one of the things that really stood out for me is also that who mental health professionals, the mental health system, right? The hospitals, the psychiatrists, the very systems, and not just the people in the systems, who they perceive as disabled is often also part of the reason why a lot of disabled people probably lose out on mental health support, right? Because you don't look, quote unquote, crazy. You don't look, you are laughing too much to actually have depression, right? So that I think feeds into this assumption of, and that feeds worse for disabled people, because what does it impact in terms of who has access to these services, right?
The confusion between functionality and, functionality and disability.
Yeah. Yeah. Over to you, Nadi.
Sorry, what's the question for?
It's
your panel, you say whatever.
No, just broadly to think about this need for an understanding of ableism and what the effects it has on disabled people's lives from the perspective of lived experience and other women and people you have worked with over the years.
Thank you, Srinidhi, and thank you all the panelists. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay.
I think a little louder might be helpful.
I should move. This is better?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you everyone. It's really, it's very interesting to hear all of you and just keep like, yes. I've been constantly nodding my head, and then I thought I'm nodding too much, so I stopped. But I think to just add to a few things, and this might resonate, this might echo some of the points that have been said. Disability is seen in a very capitalist framework, and ableism and capitalism work together, right? The idea why, for me, the first thing is why mental health professionals, why anybody does not think we could be their clients. It's because everybody thinks that we cannot earn and we cannot pay. I think a lot of idea stems from there. Idea that spaces are not accessible, that paid spaces are not accessible, online world is not accessible, therapy is not accessible, many other professionals don't think, educational institutions are not accessible, because the whole idea is, what will this disabled person even do? Like, why would they get up, why would they come, why would they need an education? And this is really taking us back 80 years or even more. Right, when we began disability activism, and we're talking about this whole space where either disability needed to be fixed or to be pitied on and thought of as charity and some help they need, these poor people. But if we see, we still currently exist in that framework. Why someone like anybody sitting in this room or others, disabled people who are even taxpayers, everybody's like taxpayers' rights. Disabled people are taxpayers. Where are their rights? Who's talking about them? There is an online portal for mental health, or government started a helpline. But why isn't it accessible? Why isn't the calling number have a text number for deaf individuals? Why do the professionals sitting there not have a training to respond? Why do they feel when I call saying, oh my God, such a lovely girl called, but she's disabled? Why does this feeling emerge? And so ableism and what impact it has is very interesting, because, and what fuels it, and I'll take Riddhi's point forward because Srinidhi cut Riddhi off, and is soon going to cut me off as well, because I was the one who told Srinidhi to really keep to time. And so, who shapes this thinking? Of course, people and society, but media.
right? And I'll tell you, and I've said this in many forums, but I'll tell you how interestingly each dialogue of the media, each representation, each imagery impacts us. The first image that I saw as a sighted child of a blind person, before my brother became blind, before I acquired blindness, before I met the community, was this very, very, very helpless person standing at the corner of a street with very big dark glasses. And people often ask me saying, why don't you wear those big black glasses? I'm like, what a bad fashion statement. Like, why would I wear it? I have pink glasses. People are like, that's not looking blind enough. And I'm like, what does that even mean, right? But I had that picture stuck in my head for years as a child when I grew up. That my duty is to go help a blind person always. No, it's not. And they don't always need help. A friend of mine who was blind was waiting for me at the corner of a street. Somebody must have looked at a similar picture, held his hand, made him cross the street. He kept saying, but, and he said, no, I have time, I can help you, I have time, I can help you. Made him cross the street and he said, ab aapka ho gaya, you felt good about yourself, please drop me back there, my friend's coming to pick me up. So, I mean, we can all laugh about it because we are here and we are together, but on a daily basis, when you have to negotiate this, it's annoying. It impacts you. People ask me saying, oh my God, how you have a supportive family and that must be so amazing and that's why you're all this confident, etc. Ableism has impacted their lives. The constant societal narrative of saying that you would be a burden on your family because you're a woman and you're disabled, somewhere goes and sticks with you. By the time you unpack, you grow up and you say, okay, I wasn't a burden, I have contributed, I work with them, I live with them, I work in my ways, I need accessibility support, I need support, and they provide that. But it also impacts the family. It impacts the mental health of the family. So ableism in a way is touching all of us in various spaces that we occupy. That was only about one image. How many of you are Amitabh Bachchan fans here? Please don't raise your hands, I'm blind. Accessibility needs. You need to whistle, clap, shout out something.
Just 30 seconds left, Nadi.
Yes, but Amitabh Bachchan's important. 1 minute for Amitabh Bachchan. Nobody is Amitabh Bachchan fan. So let me bring one dialogue which went for decades on, right? He, as this angry young man, got a lot of sympathy because he always supported his Boodhi Ma and Andhi Behan. And it's very important because this imagery has been carried on for decades and decades in media. You will never see someone who's selling a cooking range who's disabled. You'll not see a leader, an imagery of a leader. When you see women in offices, in films, in cinema and advertising, if they're selling office equipments, you'll not see a disabled person sitting there. And that's why when I presented about the leadership program, I said that just the existence of this program, that 12 women who are academicians, lawyers, comedians coming together, building this whole idea of leadership, taking the change ahead, really smashes stereotypes because we don't imagine that this leader could be a disabled leader. So I'm going to pause here, that how sort of imagery impacts ableism, ableism perpetuates imagery, and it really is, it fits in this capitalist framework and it really fuels it further.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Nidhi. I think also that because the imagery and like Abhishek said and Sharad said, and that we are living in a culture, in a society that is ableist. So the mental health professionals, of course, have imbibed much of this ableism into their thinking. So it requires very specific unlearning to
Sorry, Srinidhi, I have one small point.
Yeah.
I want to say that the ableism is so pervasive that for people with disabilities to identify that there's a mental health impact, there is no room. And it's extremely important because we are constantly told, so now officially we are called Divyang, right? That we are divine. And so if we are called divine, we are always told you'll overcome your disability or you will be this poor thing. When there's an impact on our mental health, we just either never recognize or don't want to recognize. Because we know that the minute we identify or share it, there is a judgment. There is further ableism, there's further discrimination.
So that space to identify, recognize, and share is also not, it's also impacted by ableism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nadi. Just before we move to Jasmine, I would just like to provide the interpreters time to switch. Thank you both. Okay. Jasmine, over to you now. The question we really had for you was to sort of understand what are some ways in which we can make mental health care more accessible to people, especially because a lot of your work does involve community mental health and speaking about this on a larger everyday basis. So if you could share your insights on this, that would be great.
Thank you. So we want to begin with congratulating the team on this manual and for the invite for the panel as well. I do want to actually pick up from what Abhishek said about this invisibilizing of mental health care needs of people with disabilities of all kinds. And I think that is a strong tension in the room where people with mental health disabilities don't feel included in the paradigm of disabilities. And then you see this whole tension between who's eligible for a disability certificate and who's not. As well as I think, and then it just continues why mental health disabilities don't need any physical health intervention. So there's a lot of silos and exclusionary spaces that we all seem to have built. So I'm glad that we're trying to look at these intersectionalities of disabilities, which could be physical and mental health as well. So as for your question, there's lots that we can do for making mental health accessible, because I think mental health just needs to be stated as a right. Interestingly, the Mental Health Care Act in India does say that mental health is a right that you can access. Having said that, I think there's lots to unpack of what mental health really means. It usually is a spectrum. Nobody is always well and nobody is always unwell. And we move in between these spaces of feeling well, feeling stressed, feeling distressed, having a diagnosable condition or having a disability. Now, of course, if it's a spectrum, there are lots of things that need to be done for responding to each of these conditions. But what we end up seeing in our healthcare systems is this focus on specialized care, for which we know that the need is actually lesser, and of course the costs are higher. And at the base of a pyramid, if you were to imagine it, is what we need is self-care and informal care. So like you said, what is an everyday requirement for accessing mental health? So clearly there is not enough that is being done for looking at preventive, promotive interventions that address people's mental health, as well as looking at how do you fit in this, this jigsaw puzzle of where do you actually need specialized professionals, and we'll never perhaps have enough specialized professionals. So we have to be innovative in that sense to address people's care needs in an acceptable and feasible way. So one of the interventions that we have been working on is addressing rural community mental health and social care, where we've trained people who have absolutely no background in health or mental health and work with them over a period of time to reach out to members of their own community, because that is ultimately the goal, that communities own their own mental health and social care needs, and they can do everything that's required to sort of address the gaps that we see. Having said that, of course, mental health is also impacted by structural barriers. So, you can't look at solving poverty, unemployment, gender-based violence through a mental health approach alone. So I think there is the need to make them speak to each other and address these social determinants that are coming in place. I also feel there's lots of innovative interventions that already exist in India, and there is absolutely no intention of scaling up these interventions that work. So rather than reinvent the wheel, I think we need to expand the scope of things that work, that we know that work, and also look at laws and policies which have positive elements in it and try and apply it to our communities. That's where I'll pause. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jasmine. I think it's all, you made some many necessary points around not having to repeat something that's already working. And I think that having the scope to include more awareness around how this intersects in just everyday spaces also means that families and communities can better respond to the needs of disabled people themselves. Unfortunately, our panelist Sharath had to drop off. We have, for the next round of questions, I want to begin with Riddhi. From your experience, what are some principles that you feel can be an essential part of mental health support? And this is envisioning a practice that challenges ableism.
So I think one of the major things that I want is I want mental health practitioners to be advocates for persons with disability, you know, which I talked about when I spoke earlier. I want to talk about my own therapist. She talks about, so she's older than me, she's a lesbian, she understands that families are sites of violence, like all of this is extremely, extremely helpful to me, and she understands trauma. So my therapist talks about wanting me to thrive and not just survive. And I think approaching clients from this informed disability justice perspective and tailoring responses, you know, what I mentioned as workarounds, tailoring your responses to the problems they are facing, to the situations that they are facing, is really important. So that's one thing. The second, I think, is pretty obvious in terms of therapy, but still it's especially crucial for disabled people, the profound role that childhood still plays in how we respond to ourselves and others, because very often we have internalized a lot of shame. And in my case, for instance, so I don't look crazy except when I do. So when I'm having a really bad OCD episode, like when I'm not functional, I talk to myself, you know, I do compulsive hand washing, all sorts of things. And when I was a kid, my parents did not have the understanding to know what was wrong with me. So back then, like, the responses were things like physical beatings to stop being crazy, or, you know, threats of being taken to the asylum, or, you know, like the idea of getting help, like a psychiatrist or a therapist, was something that was a punishment. So my parents would be like, you know, if you keep this up, if you don't sleep at night, if you keep washing your hands, we'll have to take you to the psychiatrist. And I was so terrified of it. So it took me all the way until I think my final year of college to say that I have OCD and to actually go to therapy for the first time, you know, and I was at the point of a suicidal breakdown by then. So, I mean, I think even now it mediates how I respond to my parents and whether they are safe spaces for me or whether my family is triggering for me. So all of these things are really important for mental health practitioners to keep in mind. And relatedly, the impact of trauma. You know, we kind of, Nidhi mentioned more about pop culture, but especially again as a crazy person, quote unquote, this is really something that plays on my mind a lot. Like, people with serious mental health issues are often depicted as villains in films. I love horror. I'm a horror movie fan, and it's a very fraught space for me because it's also such an ableist genre, right? Often the person who is the villain is like someone with schizophrenia, or something is wrong with them, or they're abnormal in some way. And, you know, these are my friends and these are people I work with, and it's me sometimes. So disabled people are often depicted as dangerous and violent. And actually, I think this blocks our ability to recognize when we are the targets of violence. So as a disabled woman, I faced sexual violence, I faced harassment, and I think therefore therapists need to take trauma into account, basically. The last two things is not having a one-size-fits-all approach. While resources are helpful, being able to meet your client where they are is very important. So for instance, if I talk about OCD, as a reporter, I was extremely miserable on a reporting trip to Jharkhand recently. And I was just, not only was I stressed, I was like freaking out about the hotel sheets and the stains there. And it was just, my OCD was acting up. And so it was really important for my therapist to tell me that you can be a good reporter and you can also be the person who carries sheets and a pillowcase on a reporting trip. And if you did not carry them, please go out and buy them, and that doesn't make you less of a reporter, it just makes you able to be the reporter that you are. And the lesson you take from this is next time you go on a field trip, carry checked in baggage maybe, you know. And I think that was so important and so validating, and I did that, and then the next day I was able to report better because I was not stressed out about anything. And the last is just be a safe space while also pushing your clients to do things that could be a challenge. So for instance, it's important for my therapist to push me to see my psychiatrist when I need to, because I will put it off because it frightens me, or to kind of check in with me about work stuff. But I need to be able to keep going to her as a safe space without fear. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, and for sharing also from your own personal experience and modeling what therapists could possibly model. For both Abhishek and Nidhi, your questions are very similar in just to understand what is your imagination, because we have in many ways discussed the problem. So what is your imagination of what this mental health support which would look like for disabled people, right?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so in fact, because we have Jasmine also on the panel, I would definitely navigate solutions which are around community, because the disabled community is it's a distraught community actually. There are so many negative experiences that we have internalized since childhood that it's sometimes impossible for us to actually share it or talk about it even amongst ourselves. There's this huge victimhood complex, and it's completely externalized, like it's something which is a product of society which we have been taught to, you know, and it comes from this entirely the whole idea of functionality, victimhood. This has been put inside us, and this triggers such negative experiences later on that it also causes a lot of mental health issues. So my entire idea, of course, apart from what Riddhi suggested, would be to find solutions within community, because listening circles and everything around disability are very uncommon. And it also becomes, because I have personally experienced, in our personal experiences, the conversation often fall apart because we are expected to be productive, we are expected to be functional, we are expected to be the best amongst our peers. Like since childhood, like everyone is okay, that person in wheelchair, you know, he got this award, why aren't you getting it? Or this blind person got this award, why aren't you getting it? And this is the constant outlook, that's how society treats you. And how to get out of that and to think positively about constructing our own community, our own lived experiences, our own idea of living as disabled people, which hasn't happened in India at all. To have community houses where disabled people can actually make their own choices, and not only disabled, queer people who can't find a home, who do not find these safe spaces. Because unless you have these safe spaces, you won't have these discussions on physical and mental health and emotional health, which is extremely important, because disabled people are somehow expected to be emotionally, you know, take care of themselves, which is also a fallacy. So all of these things are a product of the structures we have been put into, and we have to break them layer by layer, and it will happen, it will take a long time, but we have to make a start by at least talking about it.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that in particular, because I mean, it got me thinking about what gets me through when I'm having a difficult mental health time, and it is often my disabled friendships. Those that sustain and support me in the way that that is very much otherwise maybe missing in everyday existence, right? And to give an example, let's say, is that if I were to
say, have a pain flare and not be able to function. And if I reached out to somebody, often the response would be, maybe you should go to a doctor. But you reach out to disabled people and they'll be like, please don't go. Because they know that that's going to cause more trauma. You're going to have more distress, right? So, and maybe the solution is to see a doctor, but in that moment, you know that these are people who are saying to you that this is not probably the time because you're going to struggle, right? And because this medical system is in many ways deeply distressing for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, right? So I think that that is something that that kind of support system is in many ways informal in the current space, right? And having more of that does help us to support each other and build on what we are learning from our own lives, but sharing that wisdom with each other, right? So I think that that's very helpful, a way to perceive what support systems could look like, right? Over to you, Nadi, and oh, okay, fine, okay. So the last, so we can just go to Jasmine and come back to Nadi. Just Jasmine, in terms of what are your learnings from the work that you have been doing on WHO's quality rights framework?
Mute.
You're on mute, I think. No?
And can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I suppose the question is really what has been the experience of working with healthcare professionals, and I do speak from implementing the WHO's quality rights framework, and as the name sort of suggests, it's trying to improve quality by reducing human rights violations for people with mental health disabilities. So while it sounds great, and while there is the whole UNCRPD, which we haven't mentioned so far, which is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it really is trying to convert how do we translate these principles and ideas to practice, which is easier said than done, as we are all aware. And I think the experience so far with working with mental health care professionals, not just here, but across different contexts and countries, is the biomedical model seems to stick quite a bit. It's a huge effort to try and shift perspectives from this individual blaming model of disability, where you're responsible for everything, your consequences of your disability, to a model where we can look at social and human rights model, where we look at the interactions between our environment and how that impacts our disability. So I think that's been a huge effort to try and change attitudes and perspectives. And when it comes to mental health, it's really attitudinal barriers more than any other barriers. So that's been quite a challenge, because and there's obviously no recognition of social determinants to mental health or disabilities in this biomedical model, because things such as poverty, gender-based violence, unemployment all exist on the outside. So if you only are going to blame the individual, you will never, I suppose, find solutions. I think there is an opportunity to use the CRPD to try and change some perspectives, with as many challenges as there might come. But I think the emphasis has always been to say, how are you going to include people with disabilities as an equal member of their own settings and contexts. And I think to bring in parity argument has always sort of worked, but sometimes not worked. And often we see that we've just learned to normalize that there is an assumed mental capacity when you have a disability, and somehow your mental capacity should determine whether you are entitled to be a legal person or entitled to hold rights and exercise rights. So I think the challenge is to fight against those notions of equating your mental capacity and your legal capacity, and to say that we all have a right to make our own decisions, even if they're good or they're terrible, because we've all learned from our terrible choices sometimes, and sometimes it's paid off. So there's positive risk taking as much that can happen. So I think conversations like these have helped in bringing about change in mental health care systems. So we did do the quality rights intervention at about 6 to 9 facilities in a state called Gujarat, where we were looking at how do you bring an organizational change to look at human rights and quality improvement and link the two, to see how we can bring about a change, and how do we center voices of people with lived experience, whether that's through peer support interventions where people with lived experience work with others in their recovery journey. And I think, just like it was said earlier by one of the panelists, that you don't want to overcome, you never really get cured per se. So if it is a recovery journey, how do we best support people that are along this path? So I suppose those have been some of the experiences of doing this. We've had some success, but I think overall the healthcare system just needs to question their approach and their model, and like this panel itself needs to center the voice of people with lived experience to direct the course of action.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. I think it adds the layer of thinking for us as well as to how do we, like Sharad was also saying, how do we mainstream this conversation and bring it into more everyday spaces of where people reach out for mental health support, and to bring this very much needed intersection into that conversation. And Nadi, if you would like to make some closing comments.
I think we'll skip my remarks. I'll maybe at the end speak, because we should dive into Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, then I just wanted to check with the interpreters. We are 20 minutes up, so.
Oh, no, it's
okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, and if you could share them. If you have any specific panelist in mind, you can, but otherwise somebody will answer.
Hi, I'm Dhruva Pethe. I'm the son of Sadamini Pethe here. My question is a major one because nobody is thinking about the disability that people have. Some people think that a person can have only one disability. But if you think of Helen Keller, like she had blindness as well as deaf. What will you do for making the book accessible to them? Like if you would manage interpreters, if they are blind as well as deaf, how would they see the interpreters? And if you are trying to use Braille, they can't understand Braille as they cannot hear to say, if you are telling them that this is A, this is B, how will you manage to do that?
So does anybody want to answer?
I'll just respond.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for asking that question. So we were in touch with a few deafblind folks, and they've been using Braille displays to use the soft copies. We've also worked on the accessibility of this manual, not just from the team and our knowledge, but we've also worked with accessibility experts called Barrier Break. And thank you for reminding that, because they are mentioned in our acknowledgements page and I missed mentioning them. So Barrier Break works across disabilities and have found solutions that work for most disabilities. And like I've responded to Sadamini about the sign language. So for deafblind individuals, it's more the Braille displayer options that they access, many of our deafblind friends. So that's what the electronic version would help them do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Also, just to say that the manual is, Barrier Break also looks at contrasts, colors, fonts, sizes, looks at people who may have learning disabilities,
visual disabilities. So it's basically they work on cross disability accessibility solutions, and they've testified and worked on this manual, and that version, which has been rejigged by them and worked by them, has been printed. So just also to bring that to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think just also to reiterate that this manual is freely available on our website. So everybody can download it and access it on their computers. It has many links which have multiple videos, etc., which can be used on the computer. So it does meet a dual accessibility of print as well as a digital version. Yeah. Yes, Anubha.
Yeah. Firstly, I would like to say I'm glad that you people talked about listening circle, having a safe space. Along with that, talking about chronic illness, pain flares, and disability together, because usually people don't understand that whole how it actually comes along together. But my question is, we talked about listening circles. Many of organizations, even we do that. We have organized workshops. We do something or the other. In disguise of a workshop, it's actually a support group. But what are your opinions about having a structured support group? Because at times there are scenarios where people don't fit in there, and they still need support, and we have a high need about it. I mean, for example, a while back I came across a woman who's in her 60s, and she was reaching out for her son who is dealing with a chronic illness, and she needed support. She needed, she was looking for a support group with mothers whose kids have chronic pain and chronic illness issues. But sadly, I couldn't help her out, rather than just saying that, ma'am, I'll be there for you and I'll listen to you. And that system cannot work on a long run. So, I mean, do you feel that we can eventually create a structured support group system? Should we have one or not?
Yes, Abhishek.
I think it will have to happen organically, because we can't actually, if you have a structured support group and with so many diverse bodily experiences, you know, it is very difficult, and that's why I said it's a very tricky path, and it's a very difficult, it will take a long time, because everyone has diverse bodily experiences. Then it becomes almost, we have so much negativity amongst us since childhood, that we go, whenever we go out, we get on a feast of who is a bigger victim, which happens often in disability circles, and we have to accept that. So we have to get beyond that. How to get beyond that? How to have conversations? We have to find commonalities. We have to build. That language also is missing. What is the language in India where we can talk about? Let's talk about disability in 2 minutes, and 5 people will use different things, you know. And then you will have to explain them what is your invisible disability, what is flares. Then she will have to explain. Riddhi will explain OCD क्या है. Then Nidhi will explain कि visually impaired क्या है, low vision क्या है. So the amount of awareness amongst people about disabilities in general, the entire gamut is so governmentalized and certified that it goes through the way of certification and welfare system, which is very limited. That to have a conversation amongst it, so there are 2 ways to go about it. Either expand the gamut within the government and say ki, please recognize chronic illness, please recognize invisible illness. That will take a long time. The other way is to talk about it and form your own listening circle. In that sense, people will be excluded. It is always a gradual path. For example, I know from personal experience that it took you years to explain to people what your disability was, you know. And so it's always, and that's why without having a structure which is receptive to the idea of ability privilege, you know, if people understand ability privilege, they will accept your disability, they will accept invisible illness, they will accept OCD, they will accept. But people don't even accept the idea of ability, that they have ability privilege, that they by themselves, by their bodily functional selves, have some ability, some kind of privilege which others don't have. So entire idea of ableism and ability privilege is actually at the core of it. And without that, we won't be able to, we will be moving in circles, we'll have our own, small circles, but the larger discussion we won't be able to have unless that permeates the entire conversation.
Does anybody else want to say something?
Prithidi, would you like to add?
No, you go ahead.
No, just answer. I just wanted to add, Anuma, directly just taking the example that you gave, even in this space, right, if you wanted to create a parent support group, parents of other people with disabilities will have to come together. It cannot be something that we do because it's not going to help, right? So I've spoken to a lot of parents of blind individuals. When I was going blind, when I became blind as an activist with other, parents of other women with disabilities, they see me as their child. Because for them, I'm still the person with a disability whose parents they may want to connect with, right? So I think finding community also works for, like, the people around us or caregivers have to have their own community. And so organic, yes, I would say supported and organic both as a combination, where some sort of encouragement is given, but this risk of not just being the victim, but being in the language of overcoming disability. And it particularly happens in caregiver circles, where the whole idea then goes down to how much my child has overcome this disability. And so I think an overall shift in language and perception, that's why a holistic approach to work has to be there, where you're constantly shifting language and perception in society and challenging, like this whole ableism narrative is shifting.
Just one thing. In fact, in America, you have schools or colleges or religious institutions which actually formalize this kind of process. In our institutions, where is even the understanding of disability? Take me to a school which is not an inclusive school and show me kids who know what disability is. Have they ever been taught what disability is? So we don't have the functional, we don't even talk about the fundamentals of disability anywhere in our society, in any phase of our life, be it school, college, religious institution. So we can't impose disability and expect, it to organically grow without it being embedded in the society somewhere. And it's a long way to grow, and that's why, and there is also the conflict that we can't put the onus on the NGOs completely, because that is also different. They have their own scope, they have their own area they're working in. We can't expect them to, but definitely, this is definitely a number we have to think about this, and we have to work on this in the long term.
It's also important to kind of, I guess if some such support group exists, I think I would also say a lot of the onus is on the government on like knowing what exists and reaching out and then spreading that. So for instance, Kili Kili is something that I found out about recently. It's primarily parents of disabled children. Again, it's a caregiver support group, but they're committed to building inclusive playgrounds, and now there are inclusive playgrounds in multiple cities. But I just wish that there was a way to speed this up, and I think it would be sped up if there was a structure. So I think there is a place for the structure, and that's where the government has to come in. That's where support has to be provided, and we have to talk to each other.
I think Jasmine wants to make a point, and then we'll just move to the next question. We have two more, and then we can close it.
Just a quick point. Should support groups exist, the evidence is positive. Having a peer support network is not a bad idea. That's all that I would say. Of course, it depends on why the group is coming together, what your collective identity needs to be. There is one that I think is being run in Mumbai, as far as I know, is Bipolar India. And we had tried setting up these support groups at the mental health facilities where people with lived experience themselves came for these support group meetings and not care providers. It was actually quite helpful. It was helpful to think through some of these issues, to build in empathy and get a shared sense of community. So that's my 2 bit about it.
Thank you, Jasmine. And that also makes sense about the layers in which the support needs to be provided and not just one form that fits all, which is primarily what so many of the panelists have been saying from the beginning. I think Sadamini had a question, and there was one more question at the back.
So I had a question because Abhishek had said something about having, knowing about schools, colleges, different universities. Do they even know what disability means? Are the children aware of, are they being taught what disability is? But we do have the RPWD Act, in which it does mention that it is supposed to be there. I am actually interning, I am studying LLB, and I have some experiences with deaf children, other children, and the rule that says that awareness giving is a must. It should be included in the courses. It has to be there in all the books, and this is something that, implementation is not happening. In Aligarh, there is Aligarh Muslim University. There are some deaf people, and if maybe there's there's a rehab council, they need to give out more awareness. I've tried to reach out to them as well, but response is very limited. Just wanted to share that with you. And my question is that mental health, yes, it is a big issue that is not being addressed. And in the Indian society, there is always a prejudice, there is always negative feelings towards mental health. People tell you that no, you don't need a doctor for this, but we do. There is a lot of stigma, and how can we remove that stigma? Because a lot of deaf people are taught that it's nothing, you just don't even worry about it, stop worrying, why are you worrying? It is the parents also, because they live with the parents, they do not accept. Parents also need to get some awareness, and then the children also need more awareness, and collectively everybody does need to know more about it, be provided more resources, given accessibility, more contacts. So the question, I hope you understand, how will we get that? How do we ask? How do we question? Right now I have the privilege of, talking about it. A lot of people don't. So how do I myself, I can't talk to people in this field. We need a professional. So how do we go about doing that?
Should we take the last question also?
Yeah, okay. Can we just take the last question? Sorry, we only have time for one.
Hi, I'm Astha. I'm from the Third Eye. Thank you for putting together such an incredible panel. I wanted to know how do we imagine a community mental health care model that goes beyond individualized therapy models, especially considering we live in a country where language around disability, invisible disability and mental health is still not accessible to many people. And the idea of accessing individual therapy is also very alien to a lot of people. So how do we build on community or public mental health care models from a disability justice perspective? Thanks.
I was just going to ask Jasmine if she would answer, and then Riddhi, you can answer.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Just 1 second, Jasmine. We just want to switch the interpreters.
And I can go with Saudami's question.
Yeah, after.
And I'll end.
Yes. Okay. Good to go, Jasmine.
Okay, great. I think that's a great question, and that's exactly what we've been advocating for. Is if you do want to create a model which is based in communities with the rights perspectives, with a public health perspective, co-create with your communities. Find the language that works for your communities rather than coming in with terms which might be very biomedical or stigmatizing or discriminatory. Because we have to find solutions that work for where you're working, whose needs are you trying to address. So that would be my short answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Jasmine. Riddhi?
So I want to say that some of these models already exist, right? Like there are lots of these working, so Anjali Mental Health Rights Organization is one such organization that works in West Bengal, and in Calcutta they have this urban mental health care program called Janamanush, where it's exactly this. So, and they're working with the government, I think with the municipal corporation or something, and in specific wards they set up this I think there's a mandate to provide some kind of public health care, and so they have worked in comprehensive mental health care as part of that health care. So, you know, people in the neighborhood then find out, and these are very like working class neighborhoods. So they find out that, okay, here there is a Didi who is talking about this, and that's how they find out, and then they go to the center, and then people are able to assist them if they need to kind of talk about their issues, they can. And I don't know if they have peer circles, maybe they do, but I guess I would put I think this relates to the previous question, which is that one, these models exist, two, they need to be scaled up, and three, a lot of the onus for that, again, I would say, is on the government. You know, there's only so much civil society can do, and if there are models that exist, then why is the government not listening and scaling them up? Like, again, sorry to harp on the disability pension point, but one of the recent reports I had done was on, you know, for instance, people with Down syndrome or people with schizophrenia who are working class or who are from marginalized caste backgrounds. For instance, during COVID, they suffered so much because the pensions were not coming. There was no livelihood or income. The amount of knowledge that they had about, you know, where to go, where to seek help was really sorely lacking, and whose responsibility is that? You know, and I for years, I think since 2013, the recommendation has been made to increase the disability pension amount by significantly, and that has not happened. And during COVID as well, there was a report, I think Rising Flame may have been involved, but there was a report that was made by NCPEWD.
NCPEDP.
NCPEDP, yes. Sorry, I'm bad with short forms. But basically, again, they were asking for an increased amount of financial support, and as far as I know, like, nothing happened.
Uniformity in the pension across the country.
Murli sir is standing. Murli sir actually demanded 4,000 rupees, and I will always remember that, but no one responded. And everyone wrote letters. In fact, every member of the disability community, all the NGOs, they wrote letters. No one responded.
People don't listen, and if you if you contact the government, if you contact the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, they don't respond. There's not even a culture of responding to journalists, which is a basic duty. So, I mean,
I'm going to cut everybody because we are like already 50 minutes over time. So, Abhishek and Nadi, just to, Abhishek, you can respond to Sudhamini, and Nadi, closing thoughts after that.
Hi, Sudhamini. See, the thing is, we will have to move step by step. RPD is a document. It's a very new document. There is nothing on the ground according to RPD right now. I have had panic calls from people who want to, in fact, who have been violated and want to complain, but they can't do anything. As for sign language, I think we have to, I think a lot of deaf rights groups have to lobby with the government. There's no other way to have sign language interpreters everywhere, especially in the mental health institutions also. You know, as for the conversations, we are on a slow train. We are still having conversations on disability and mental health at a very slow pace. I think it will become better, as it's also about privilege now. People who don't have privilege, you know, the only mental health conversation which we have in small towns is Nasha Mukti, which is basically detoxification and you know, like anti-drug and anti-thing policy. So it's a chain thing which is moving at many levels. But you are right. The thing is, at least we have an act, so we can demand. But there is, till we have deaf interpreters in educational institutions, in doctors' offices, in hospitals, we won't have, like, we almost claimed as if RPD was our ADA, American Disability, American Act for whatever it's called, yeah. And that ensures you have interpreters everywhere, you know, like everywhere, wherever you want, you can demand an interpreter. We don't have a pool of, the government doesn't have a pool of interpreters. Most of the civil society goes to NGOs to get interpreters. So we have to, like, we are still building from, you know, grassroots. But of course, this is definitely one of the things which we should fight for, is to have actually have a conversation on mental health within all disabled groups and have interpreters everywhere, so that this is not, it should not be that one group is again having the conversation, and because that is essential. But again, also the problem is, Sadamni, which I realize, is that we have different cultures, we have built different cultures around. So a lot of deaf NGOs and participants will have their own thing, and a lot of things. We need to get our act together. If we really want to work on it together, we have to have common forums. So that is something definitely we have to work on.
Right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Sorry, I thought I had to go immediately.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. And I think the point that that is really needed in terms of disability advocacy in this country is that it needs to be cross disability, right? And I think that having that space where we don't put the onus on one group to advocate for access needs of that group, right? That we all learn to advocate for access needs for all of us. Right? I think that becomes essential, because otherwise I think we will be one step behind, and like most people, it's easy to divide and say that we will put a ramp but we will not give you an interpreter, right? And demanding that there be both ramp and interpreter is essential, right? So and on that note, over to Nidhi.
Thank you, Srinidhi, for adding that point. It's really important. I just want to, I'll try and wrap both the questions in this closing thought that I have. When we think of health, we're still, and I'm not even talking about mental health. Right now, if you think about physical health, we still think about the fixing approach. For all people, it's not about disabled people, it's not about people who are living with physical health conditions. Health is still seen as correction. Till we all don't come together and see health as a right. In the pandemic also, all of us struggled a lot because it was more a responsive thing. Health systems were not set up in an inclusive fashion. Inclusion in health spaces was not a right that was claimed already or realized already, right? And so health, when it's seen as a right and not as a medical, in the medical model framework of disability, we'll realize that it will help mental health conversations. Mental health conversations within schools. I'm not even talking about disability, the quote-unquote special needs schools. I'm not talking about inclusive schools. I'm just talking about schools. The whole idea that children grow up with, like Riddhi said, in the popular culture, is that quote-unquote crazy people are either villains, or they are funny, or they are someone to stay away from. They understand that there has to be something really wrong with you to go to a counselor. And when you don't, if we don't start shifting those ideas at the level when you're a kid, when you're a child, and we all talk about disability sensitivity in the same way, that you need to expose children to disability inclusion. We need to see enough of disabled and non-disabled children work together, play together, be in the same space, interact with each other. Then we'll not have adults who are professionals, government officials, activists, just in a space, in a hotel, in a restaurant, on the street, who will say, Ari, I've never seen a disabled person. Because they'll grow up with disabled people, they'll be more integrated, and they'll also come from this space that mental health can be accessed, mental health support can be accessed. It is for everyone. And when a disabled child also grows up in this environment, when we change this larger environment and talk about disabled children growing up in a similar environment, this whole guilt, shame, hesitancy of accessing mental health support needs. For me, the community question, for me, the mental health question is always coming from, are we as disabled people also able to say that we need mental health support? Many a times we can't, because of these multiple frameworks, because we also have this ableist approach towards mental health, people who have mental health conditions. Maybe we have that, maybe we are hesitant, maybe we are in the societal perception. So building communities, and when we think of health as a right, we are already talking about then the Didi, who will then at the Asha worker level work with us and think about mental health. And it will become an everyday conversation. So communities can be tackled in multiple ways, reached out in multiple ways, built in multiple formats. and will definitely allow the shift in the idea of mental health and in the idea of disability, will help us create safer spaces, more inclusive spaces, and more sensitive therapy spaces which are accessible. Thank you.
I think it was more than an hour of a lot of insight and important things for us to think about, not just for mental health practitioners themselves, but us as people who inhabit this space alongside disabled people. So thank you so much, all the panelists, and it was fantastic and very insightful for us. I just would like to close by repeating that the manual is available on Rising Flames website. So do share it with people who aren't in the room at the moment, who aren't on our Zoom, so that more people can access and we can begin this process of unlearning together. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinidhi. Thank you, all our panelists, Abhishek, Riddhi, Sharad, Jasmine. I'm just going to take another minute, everyone, to thank all the people who've made this manual happen and today's event happen. Sign interpreters, Sarah and Pinky, thank you so much for being here with us today. To our volunteers, Arjita Mittal, Upayana, Mahita, Sneha, Amisha, Gaurav, Sandeep, Umesh, thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for our interpreters and volunteers, please? Thank you to our video team, Shams and the entire team who made this hybrid event possible. Thank you so much. It's really important in this current space and time to have this kind of privilege. Thanks to all of you. The Planet Able team, Neha is here. Thank you so much, Planet Able, Park Hotel, and all of you for being here. Thank you very much, Prathama, again, for putting this lovely manual together. As we said, this is just the first one. We're going to be, and I was very glad when Jasmine brought some of these points, we will have a part 2 where we see intersectionality and ableism coming together and impacting mental health, invisible disabilities, and interaction on mental health. We will also then look at violence and the impact on mental health. The violence experiences, one of the manuals, and then another piece around mostly relationships. We really want to now start thanking the team. And can I have the Rising Flame team on, the core team on the stage, please, here. I'd like to thank Rising Flame advisors, Shikha, Richa, Ashish, and Janet. Thank you so much for being there for us and advising us through our journey. Thank you to our Director of Board, Dr. Nadi Goyal, and to this amazing Rising Flame team who's been with us through the journey. Chenika Iyer. Round a round of applause, please. Chenika has really, would say they have spent sleepless nights to put this program together and to get the lovely booklets printed, and has been with us for 2.5, nearly quarter to 3 years now. Chenika, so almost from the beginning of our journey and through transitions and through changes and through innovations and through launches. So thank you so much, Chenika, for being such an integral part of Rising Flame. And again, a huge round of applause for Nadi Raghavan, who's been with the oldest team member of Rising Flame with us since the inception. Thank you so much both for holding this core team and the work together. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you who've joined us virtually. We're really glad to have you here and to connect through the Zoom medium. Arjita, if we could ask you to close the meeting. Thank you, and all of you who are present here, once again, thank you for making the time, for being here, and please do not leave without having lunch.
Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and click the bell button for updates. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit our website to know more about our work. Links in the description.